Here's a little song I wrote. You might want to sing it note for note. Don't worry. Oh, be happy. In every life we have some trouble, but when you worry, you make it double. Don't worry. Oh, be happy. Don't worry. Be happy now. Don't worry. Be happy. Don't worry. Be happy. Please don't worry. How about that? And please be happy. Ain't got no place to lay your head. Somebody came and took your bed. Don't worry. Be happy. Your landlord say your rent is late. He might have to litigate. Don't worry. It's just money. Be happy. Don't worry. Don't worry. You might win the lottery. Not that it's about money, of course, but that lottery would help with the rent and avoid litigation. Ain't got no cash, ain't got no style. Ain't got no guy or girl to make you smile. Don't worry. Be happy. 'Cause when you worry, your face will frown, and that will bring everybody down. Don't worry. Don't worry. Be happy. Don't worry. Be happy. Don't worry. Be happy. Don't worry. Be happy. I don't know where I got this accent, but I'm not worried. I'm happy. That's why I have the accent, I guess.
Make you happy? I don't know what I can talk about. Whoa. First of all, I have to make sure I understand. Is there anybody here that does not want to be happy? Because I think I need to warn you. We're going to be throwing a lot of happiness around. You better cover yourself up if you don't want to be happy, because there's going to be some happiness that might hit you by accident. But if you're looking for a little bit more happiness in your life, let's bring it on. Get that catcher's mitt out, and we're going to catch a little happiness today. Because there's some wonderful things that we can do that make us happy. And also, I have to admit that I'm going to steal shamelessly from some fantastic research that has been done on happiness. One of them you may have seen is a wonderful film entitled Happy. And it has some incredible, specific research about what we can do in order to have a greater sense of happiness in our life. So what is this happiness thing? Doesn't it sometimes kind of seem like this sort of mishmash of feelings or emotions or thoughts that we kind of have? Let's take a moment to kind of really reflect on, what does happiness feel like? Think about a time in your life when you felt really happy. Remember a particular moment. Recreate that in this moment. When you felt really happy, what did your body feel like? What were those sensations? What were you thinking about? What were your emotions? Can everybody create in this moment that sense of being happy? The beauty of this is that we have the ability to create the sensation of happiness regardless of our external circumstances. And you did it just then. It turns out that happiness is something that happens in our brain. There's certain biochemical interactions like dopamine and endorphins and serotonin that starts to light up a part of our brain. And they know now from MRIs and EEGs that there's certain little receptors that we have in our brains that causes us to experience this sense of happiness. And so the good news is that just like any kind of a muscle, we can actually learn and expand our brain to be more likely to be happy. Now, one of the problems is that sometimes we are really lousy judges of what makes us happy. It turns out that if you were to take a pie and think about how are the things that make us happy, about 50% of our happiness is genetic. 50% we came out of the womb with a set point of feeling a certain level of happiness in our life. Wonderful things may happen to you, and you'll feel happier for a moment, and then you go back to the set point. Lousy things might happen to you, and you'll feel lousy for a while, and then you'll go back to the set point. And that's about 50% about what makes us feel happy. And about 10% is our actual external circumstances. There is a little bit of money, social status, where you live, what age you are, that in fact increases the amount of happiness that you feel. But the most wonderful thing about this pie chart is that 40% of our happiness comes from intentional behavior. We actually have the ability to do certain things in our life that can increase the level of happiness that we experience in each moment, in each day. So I wanted to talk about what are those intentional behaviors that we could do to make us feel happier. But first, there's a lot of misperceptions about happiness that I thought I better clear up. And first of all, there's some things that we think make us happy that it turns out statistically the research shows that, yeah, not so much. Anybody ever thought if I just had a little bit more money, then I'd be happy? I know I sure have. And it turns out that money does make you a little bit happier. If you have no money, if you are homeless and you get an extra $5,000, that extra $5,000 really does make you happy. If you haven't eaten today and you get a meal, that makes you happy. So there's a direct correlation between the amount of money that you have and the level of happiness that you're experiencing, directly up to about $50,000 a year. So up until that point, yeah, money's going to make you a little bit happier. But the fascinating thing about it is from $50,000 a year to $50 million a year, the level of happiness that increases is almost negligible. So what on earth was Bill Gates thinking about? It certainly wasn't for the happiness. The second misperception that we have is something called the hedonic adaptation. And some of you may have heard and even tried a philosophy called hedonism. Hedonism is the philosophy that the purpose of life is to just get as much pleasure as you possibly can for yourself. Anybody ever tried that philosophy? Kind of works for a while. But over the long term, yeah, not so much. And the reason is because of this theory, this thing called the hedonic adaptation. And it is that whenever we find happiness in some sort of external circumstances, if you get a new car, that moment you get in it for the first time, you smell the Corinthian leather, and it feels so wonderful. The second time you get in the car, yeah, it still feels pretty good. But then about a month after you've had that new car, it doesn't give you the same buzz, that same sense of happiness that you got from the original time when you first sat in the new car. And I asked if Kathy Sweeney would let me talk about her hedonic pleasure. Kathy Sweeney loves shoes. And Kathy tells me that every time she gets a brand new pair of shoes, there's this feeling of happiness. And then it kind of wears off. She gets a little scuff on them, or some new style comes in. And she tries to tell me that when she just looks at her shoe collection, that it makes her happy. But really, she says, I'm thinking about that next pair of shoes I'm going to buy. So perhaps some of us have also tried retail therapy and found that it does provide a little bit of happiness. Because, unfortunately, because of the hedonic adaptation, we always have to keep going back and shopping some more. It's never enough because it always keeps wearing off. A third misconception that we have about happiness is that, well, adversity is certainly a reason why people cannot be happy. I've had bad things happen in my life. You cannot possibly expect me to be happy. Haven't we all had situations, traumas, and tragedies that has caused us to lose that sense that happiness is even possible? And yet what the research shows is that people who have gone through significant adversity and found the strength within themselves to overcome, to find that resilience and that ability to push through and to get beyond, they actually experience a greater sense of happiness having had that adversity. So these are some of the misperceptions that cause us to get lost when we're trying to create that intentional behavior that will enable us to be happier. And I also wanted to talk about a Time magazine article several years ago that was called The Biology of Joy. And there's a professor from Wisconsin named Richard Davidson, and he has studied this physiological impact of happiness. And we're able through MRIs and EEGs to actually see people and how happy they look on an MRI. And so he has actually studied thousands of people, put them on the machine, and created a chart to show where the average level of happiness is. And so if we were all to take an MRI, we would find that in general, there's people that come out on the lower end of the scale. Yeah, not so happy. And there's some people that come out on the higher end of the scale. Yeah, happier than most. And then the majority of us, it's a bell-shaped curve, come out somewhere in the middle of, I'm just sort of averagely happy. Now, what Richard Davidson discovered, though, was when he started to look at Buddhist monks that had practiced meditation of loving kindness and compassion for many, many years, he started to discover that it threw off the bell-shaped curve completely. In fact, there was a monk named Mathieu Ricard who had practiced Buddhism for 30 years. And when he hooked up this MRI, all this stuff, to Matthew's head, he found out that Matthew's level of happiness was off the chart. He deemed him the happiest man in the world. And how can this be? All he had simply done is spend 30 years meditating on loving kindness and compassion. And the encouraging thing about this is we may not be Matthew Ricard, the happiest man in the world. But what they found is that by practicing loving kindness and compassion for as little as 3 months, that they were able to increase the level of immunity that people had by over 20%. So something as simple as taking 3 months every day, working that muscle of loving kindness and compassion, physiologically changes you for the good and creates more happiness in your brain. So it's so encouraging to us that there's things that we can do to create this sense of happiness. So what are those things? They're easy and, oh my goodness, they're free. There's 5 things I want to talk about that we could immediately start doing today that would increase our level of happiness. And the very first one I want to talk about is gratitude. Something as simple as count your blessings. It's easy for us to get bogged down by the things that are not going right in our life. But it is also very easy to look for the things that are going right. And I wanted to share a particular story. I was just on a 7-day silent retreat. And when you're on retreat, you're not talking, you're not looking at anybody, so you don't have a lot to focus on. So I noticed that as every mealtime, we went through the meal line. It was buffet style, and you would get your tray and your plate, and then you would get up and go and get your napkin, and there was a variety of silverware, different kinds of forks and spoons and knives, and pick them out and go get your meal and sit down and eat in silence. And it took me a couple of days to realize that I was starting to, every time I walked up to the meal line and I got ready to choose my silverware, I was starting to have a little bit of anxiety. Suddenly I had noticed that when I got to the spoons, there were a lot of different kinds of spoons. Some were heavy, some were deep, some were flat, some were light. And I had developed an affinity for a couple of spoons. And every time I got to the silverware, is my spoon going to be there? Did somebody take my spoon? I'm looking through, I'm digging through those spoons. I don't care how long the people behind me have to wait. I'm going to find my spoon. And what I realized was there was a moment, if I found my spoon, oh, happy day. It's going to be a great meal. But if I didn't find my spoon, disappointment, resentment, anger. Who's got my spoon? And I realized, since this is a silent retreat, I was entirely making this up in my head. And so I realized that I had the power to decide how I was going to feel about spoons. And so I made it a commitment that every time that I went through the meal line, that I was going to be grateful for the fact that I got a spoon. How wonderful. Have you ever tried to eat a meal when you needed a spoon and you didn't get any spoon? And so every time I walked up to the meal line, I would internally, because it was silent, spoons! Oh, happy day, I'm getting a spoon, and I'm getting a knife, and a fork too. Oh my gosh, life is wonderful. Fresh water, wonderful food, Somebody has prepared a meal for me. I felt a sense of gratitude. And that simple activity of counting our blessings is something that we can do every single day. It may not be spoons for you. It may be something else like getting caught in traffic or not getting in the fastest line at the grocery store. But we can have a sense of gratitude that we're driving down the road, or that we have these grocery stores that are filled with amazing amounts of food. So we can find that sense of gratitude in our lives. The second thing we can do is we can look for the good. Have you ever had one of those days where you get up and like before you've even had your cup of coffee, 3 things have gone wrong? And you kind of have that feeling of, oh my gosh, this is going to be a crappy day. And if you look for the crappiness in life, I guarantee you're going to find it. And so we have that opportunity to catch ourselves when we start to try to look for the crappiness in life and realize that we can look for the good instead. It turns out that being an optimist is actually one of the most powerful things you can do for your health. There was a study in 1960 where they looked at 900 people and they gave them a test in order to assess whether or not they considered themselves to be optimists or pessimists. And years later, they discovered the simple fact of being optimistic about life added 16 years to each person's life on average. Being optimistic, looking for the good, is good for us. The third thing that we can do is to create a sense of belonging, a sense of a greater purpose greater than ourselves. And I wanted to share this story of this research they had done in London. They took a man and allowed him to, made him look sort of distressed, like he was having some sort of trouble. He was lying in the grass. And people were walking by. This was a fairly common area. And they studied, what did the people do when they saw this man in distress? The first time they did the experiment, when 100 people walked by, only 15 people stopped and tried to offer assistance. And then they did the experiment one more time, and they changed only one thing. They made the man wear a jersey from the soccer team in the local town. And by wearing the soccer team jersey, it increased the likelihood that somebody was going to stop and help him from 15 to 85. Now I ask the question, if someone is laying out outside the church and they have on a Jayhawk sweatshirt, maybe you help them, maybe you don't. But it is that sense of belonging to something greater than ourselves that gives us this sense of happiness. And I offer this story because it's important for us to realize that we are all part of the human race, that we are all inseparably interconnected. And even if you came here alone today, you are here as part of this spiritual family. You are part of my spiritual family. We can help each other, support and encourage each other. And by doing so, it actually will create a greater sense of happiness within ourselves. And fourth, we can lighten up. Laughter and playfulness creates lots of dopamine and serotonin and endorphins. And we're going to try it right now. I would like for everybody to make the goofiest face you possibly can. And laugh. Just laugh for no reason. those endorphins, man. We got some happiness going on. We can lighten up. There was a wonderful thing in the documentary where they have a race in California. It's a regular 5K race. But the only difference is in order to be in the race, you have to dress in a monkey suit. We can find that way to find silliness in every day in our life, and that will create more happiness. And lastly is meditation. That opportunity to sit in the silence and to cultivate this sense of compassion and caring, a sense of gratitude, a sense of belonging, and for looking for the good. So we'll take those thoughts into meditation and we'll practice being happy. So as we take this opportunity to just rest in the silence, it's helpful to begin by taking 3 slow, deep breaths, breathing in fully and completely, and holding that breath for a moment, and then exhaling, letting every drop of air out. And then once again, breathing in full and deep. And breathing out. And then one last time, breathing in completely. And exhaling. And as we give ourselves this time in meditation, we can mentally scan through our body and see if there's any areas of tension or tightness. Just imagine breathing in to that particular area, and that the breath becomes a balm, a relaxer, allowing us to have that full body sense of rest and relaxation. And so today we will practice that sense of gratitude, beginning by just having that sense of gratitude that we are here in this moment, that we are safe and protected. Grateful for being together in this spiritual community. Grateful for having clothing and shoes. Grateful for the food that we have eaten this morning, and that the food that we will have for lunch and dinner. Gratitude for the fact that we have a place to sleep, that we have a pillow to rest our head upon. Being grateful and thankful for each and every person in our life. reflecting on those people who have loved and supported us, encouraged and inspired us, and have a sense of gratitude for having them in our life. And we can have a gratitude for this mind that we have and this body and the ability to be present in this moment. And so as we enter the silence, just think for a few moments about all those things in your life that you have to be grateful for in the silence. And as we leave the silence, we can take with us this experience of gratitude and a deep joy of living in each moment. Beyond any challenge or obstacle, we can seize each moment and build our muscle of happiness with gratitude, with looking for the good, with having a greater sense of purpose, with the joy of laughter and playfulness in life. And so it is.
When it looked like the sun wasn't gonna shine anymore, God put a rainbow in the sky. When it looked like the sun wasn't gonna shine anymore, God put a rainbow in the sky. God put a rainbow in the sky.